Well, hello, everybody. There we go. Now we're working. Anyhow, then welcome to the Pixel Classroom podcast here, live stream over here on your favorite networks. Remember, you can do little areas what you want to the problem here. So you can go ahead and follow us, ring that bell for notifications, or definitely think of subscribing to our channel. So people were asking me a couple weeks ago, I hadn't done an episode or live stream. Just schedules got really busy, birthday. And then, of course, we were having lots and lots of technical issues and a couple other things too. But I've decided to make up for all that, and I got an incredible guest today. He is a well-known educator. He has worked in the field in many years, and he'll introduce himself. And he's written many books, including The Zen Teacher, Sanctuaries, and of course, his recent one that came out, which I was using quite a bit in the classroom lately, is Right There and Right Now. I would like to welcome the one and only Dan Tricarico to the Pixel Classroom podcast. And there he is.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me here.
Well, thank you, Dan. I mean, even with we're recording this, of course, on March 12th, and of course, we just had the daylight savings times change. So, we as you can see from Dan's little box, he is officially 2 hours behind me too, and somehow we went to bed really late and got up early this morning, so we're really good. So, on that note, Dan, why don't you give us an introduction of who you are, what you've been doing, and we'll kind of go from there learn more about the Zen Teacher.
All right. Well, my name's Dan Tricarico. I've been a high school English teacher for over 30 years now. I always say it's pretty amazing that I've spent those 30 years not only at the same school, West Hills High School in San Diego, which I absolutely love, but in the same classroom, which is unheard of for teachers. But it's really my home away from home. I've loved every minute of teaching, and it's I can't think of a more noble profession to do, or to just helping kids is just the best thing I can think of. So, and then I'm amazed, Ryan, when you when you held up all those books, I'm like, I did all that. Writing is just my therapy. I've always loved writing. And then I figure, you write enough pages, you should put them between a cover. What can I do? And of course, I've been super blessed to get to work with DBC Inc. They're just a great company, and Dave's a great guy. So I've been very lucky.
We've definitely had our shout outs for them on here. So, gotta throw that out too. I have a friend of mine's like, you touch that air horn, I'm going to hurt you from behind the street.
Well, I didn't know you had one, so I'm a little shocked.
But yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, yes, you have quite a bit of thing. It was so funny. I was going to get these books out of the basement. I was talking to my wife downstairs just before we were getting ready to come on the air, and I was just thinking the other day, somebody was like, how do you get these people on your podcast? I'm like, well, I nicely asked them, but at the same time I also, double check, but I was like going over, and she's like, wait, he wrote all those books? I'm like, yes, he really did write all those books, which is pretty amazing, which I think we'll probably just start going through here nicely here, and people who have not checked this out, those who are hitting the little area here on the podcast on the vocal version, I'll have show notes on Dan's website, as well as his books here series, so you can check those out, as well as the DBC and everything else. But so, Dan, you said yourself, writing has been a therapy. I know you've talked about a lot of that. I've definitely used the practice. This is more in the last couple years as somebody who has dealt with depression and other issues over the many, many decades. I mean, I just turned 45. People are like, wow, you've been through a lot in 30 years. I'm like, I have actually. But what went into the creation of the Zen Teacher, which is, like as I say, creating focus, simplicity, and tranquility in the classroom. I always love the titles for these books here. But this was, it's hard to believe this book turns 8 this September. It's official. I know you were writing it before then, but hard to believe. We're going on almost a decade since the release of this first book. So what went into the Zen Teacher, and how did that really lead up to like Sanctuaries?
Good question. And I think the short version is that around 2013 or so, I was, I'd been teaching over 20 years, probably closer to 25 years. And I was just facing massive burnout. Class sizes were out of control. There were no supplies or money, that we could use for anything. And I had 10 years to go, and I was like, how am I going to make it through? I don't know. I had, at the time, a wife and a mortgage and kids growing up, and, all the things. And I just remember sitting with my head in my hands going, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I literally was taking a walk around my neighborhood trying to, de-stress and kind of calm down. And I was talking in my head like we do. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to get through. It's almost like they expect you to be a Zen teacher. And then I just had this light bulb go on. Hey, there it is. And
I was like, I'm trying to get the links to work. See, folks, I'm already having technical issues.
Well, I appreciate you showing that. But I said that's something. I think I'm onto something here. And I ran home, and the first thing I did, of course, in 2014 is you check to see if the domain name is available. And I don't know why, but the zenteacher.com was available in 2014. I'm like, that's a sign from above, that this is my path. This is, what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I started a blog called the Zen Teacher, and about how I was dealing with the burnout and the stress, and how I planned to make it through, and the strategies I was using. And then I, started writing to, again, as therapy. And I emailed Dave and I said, hey, I'm working on this thing. Will you look at it? Because by then he was publishing some teacher books. And he said, yeah, send it along. So when it was done, I sent it to him. And about 2 weeks later, he emailed me back and he said, yeah, let's do this. And to show you how successful he is, the Zen Teacher, as you said, came out a long time ago now. That was book number 8 for DBC.
Yes, it was hard to believe too.
And Sanctuaries, which came out 3 years later, was book 60. So that's how much he was able to accomplish in those 3 years. And what I always say, when you ask about how did it lead to Sanctuaries, I always say that if the Zen Teacher book was supposed to remind you to take care of yourself, that Sanctuary shows you how. Sanctuaries, I envision as more of a workbook. It has practical strategies that you can use. Zen Teacher has some too, but Sanctuaries has more strategies. And also, it was really important to me when you're talking about things like mindfulness and meditation and Zen and these kinds of things, that it wasn't just, pie in the sky, woo woo, new age mumbo jumbo, but that people could take it and use it right now and bring it in, because that's what I needed. It was something I could use right now. And even though I was a drama major and an actor, and I hung around all those people, and they're sometimes walking in the clouds a little bit, in a really cool way, I said, no, we need to be down to earth here and say, what can I do right now? And so you'll find some of that stuff in both of those books if you check them out.
Yeah, and I decided to turn right up the Sanctuaries right here on page 53, where you talk about the mediation, because you talk about gazing and the medium. Because I was a theater major too, as my background. I had a little bit of business and everything before I went back for technology and education. But yeah, I remember too, we would follow on the breathing and the areas too. We had some people that were Maslow trained and some other people were Solomons trained. So there was a lot about the breathing and everything too, and the mantras and the walking. But what was always interesting too about the walkings, and I've been doing walkings for a long time, and since we've had our dog now, which is hard to believe. She's been home with us almost 4 years now. Wow. But especially during the early days of COVID, and then definitely as we've had our various things over the last 3 years too, is how I took more of those walks. But I ended up, and luckily I live right now with my current school district, but I have a beautiful woods and truck area too. And yeah, they're re-updating finally our subdivision for various reasons, but the nice walking paths we have. So sometimes I will take her that way. The family and I will do it. We'll do a lot of summer walks too. And it's kind of nice to have that in our backyard. But I used to be the kind of guy who would disappear in my hometown, and people have known me all these years too, who still live there. Like sometimes I'll show up, like they will see me like, hey, that's Ryan. Oh, he's walking his dog. What's he doing in Sycamore? And it's just like, oh, I'm doing. But then they were like, oh, yeah, you were doing that all the time, which was always a funny thing too, because I had to do it more. Because I had torn my knee ligament, my ACL, in basketball practice at a basketball camp back summer for my senior year, and my therapist wanted me to take more walks. And some people are like, oh, you got to elevate it, you got to keep the brace on. But he's like, but you got to get it back on, because it's going to save you later. You're not going to need therapy, but you need to do these walks. And then even after I got it all off and everything, I was seen around town either walking or running. I wasn't really running. I was rollerblading then. I've run more now in the last couple years ago. Speaking of DBC authors, that's, Adam Welcome's fault for all that right now. I love you, Adam. You know that. We got to get you on here too. But yeah, one thing I really did like, because the Zen Teacher, especially when it came out too, I had just switched districts. I had gone through double loss of employees, a couple things, 2015, 2017, and then I kind of got here in Sanctuary. So I redid some of these too, and then of course I really liked it too, because the poetry template was really good because about that, because I started incorporating that in my previous, and I do it now in my current school district, about at some areas too for slam poetry. And people are like, well, how did you slam poetry? It's like, well, here's some good thing. Try the template that I see, I hear, smell. If not, Google search it, guys. As you see, it's the same template, because I kind of thought about that between yours and Lisa Johnson's. I was like, oh, you know what? Why don't I do slam poetry? These kids are always doing TikTok or B-reels and whatnot. And then all of a sudden they had a thing. Oh, yeah, I didn't think about it that way. You're right. I kind of do that now on my social media. So it was a nice little thing. That it was nice because, like I said, Zen and Sanctuaries, I felt really did go very well together, but then they can stand on their own, which was a really nice areas. Like I mean, and truth story, people do this. Like, I can't believe how many books you read. Right? I was like, well, sometimes I'll get a book and there'll be a chapter or 4. I don't say 3, I say a chapter 4. It always is, where it's like, I've read this in how many books? Like, oh, do this on social media. Well, know your limitation. Or I'm like, read it, and I'm like, skim it.
Right.
Oh, here we go, back.
Move on.
But I've read it in so many books, even when I've done my little thing with back in 2020 when I took the Broken Teacher. But I even talked about too when I did the chapter, like, okay, guys, you've probably read this 100 times before, but this is what I did with social media and blah blah blah. And then some people asked me in the last year, if you had to redo this, and this is where my next question is going to go, like, if you had to redo something, where would you have done? I said, well, I definitely would have shown about the differences and the strengths and weaknesses of social media, especially in this day and age, and finding the tribe. So I said, now I've learned more. Things have changed dramatically because of various reasons. So now it's like, I still feel this, but it's like, as many people say, it's like, yeah, I noticed you're not on Twitter very much, or you're on these other ones, and now you've switched to live stream and you've been posting constantly professionally on LinkedIn for so long. They're like, what made the change? And I said, you know what, maybe I need to do an episode, but here's the reason. But like for yours, Dan, from taking these things, it's over your career, like I said, 20, 25 years, your kids are older. Like my own son too is in the teenage years himself. So I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago, because I've been teaching 14, almost 15 years. And it's like, I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago. I'm a different person than I was 2 years ago. But how has things changed that led you evolve those between the first Zen Teacher to Sanctuaries to probably hooting a little bit into, right here, right now?
I have a 2-word answer for you: global pandemic. And that is how it's changed. And what I mean by that, Ryan, is that I feel very, very grateful that when the Zen Teacher book came out in 2015, and I started putting some of these strategies into practice myself, that who knew that 5 years later, the strategies would be even more important, and that people would really need them. And that I was very grateful that I already had a self-care practice in place, and a sort of the meditation and mindfulness practice in place when the pandemic hit, because I think I had more equilibrium. I was able to navigate it a little more smoothly and accept one of the chapters in the Zen Teacher is acceptance. One is detachment from anticipated outcomes. And I was practicing those things. So when the pandemic hit, I was like, this is not good, but I know I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to navigate it okay, because I have these things in place. So that was one major change. And I also remember thinking when the pandemic hit, well, given my message, I have a little bit of a responsibility here to step up for these teachers who are my heroes, because, Ryan, they shifted and put their entire curriculum online within days, March of 2020. And,
yeah, very true.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a heroic shift. And so, I was amazed and admire them so much for doing that, and did it, to some degree myself too, being a full-time, in-class teacher. And I tell people I'll be 60 in September, and I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And so, it was all uncharted. People were learning as they went along. And so, the things have changed wildly since the book came out. But I think what's also weird is that in some ways things haven't changed at all. The importance of lowering your stress, the importance of being grounded, the importance of using your senses, as you pointed out in the poetry template, to ground yourself and to be present. And, those qualities and those strategies have been important since time immemorial, as they say.
Very true.
And so, what I always try to remind people is that, simple is not the same as easy. And these concepts are simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy. They take practice. And, I'm, again, very grateful that I know to practice them. And one thing you mentioned, and clearly you were ahead of the curve from me on this, that I didn't realize until I was writing the Zen Teacher that a walking meditation could be a thing. I thought meditation had to be still. I thought you had to sit on the cushion, and do the mantra or whatever. But when I realized that there could be movement meditation or meditation in movement, it was a game changer, just absolute game changer. And like you said, one thing I didn't bring up, I didn't realize you were a theater guy or drama person, was that all of this for me came about from being a drama major. That in the acting classes, the acting teachers were talking about being in the moment with your scene partner and relaxation and, being present and all of that. It just, and so I got really interested in it. And then when I started feeling that burnout and I was like, well, what put me in the moment as an actor? That's what I started writing about. And the synthesis of that became those two books.
And I think it's because many people always asked me too, and I've even had my students ask me too. It's like, well, what? And like, well, you went to school for all this? Like, well, yes and no.
Exactly.
I wasn't, but I and I bring this up with my marketing class all the time too. As I always say, is like, what's the one thing you think you have to do in theater all the time? And they looked at me like, well, you have to get on stage. Like, no. What do you have to do in theater all the time? Doesn't matter if you're on stage, in the pit, background, the guy behind writing the reports or the promotional materials. And then they went, oh, marketing. I'm like, yes, you market yourself every day. So all my marketing curriculum is built off things we really did and stuff in here. And I even told them too, I went through a marketing class, both theater and regular. And I even joke with the kids too. And we do, we use Wakelet for our portfolios. Back in the day when I had to print it out, I had to run to my mother's office. I had to go home. I had my old processor, the first iMacs, the strawberry one, because my favorite color. And it was just like, I had to put it in there. And I told the kids, like, guys, I give you Flip. I have you guys do me presentation. We do these together. I'm like, back in my day, when dinosaurs rolled the earth and, our smartphones were not, and you couldn't really mute them. You had to turn them off, volume to get them off, and the battery would last 2 days. But I was telling them, like, I had to get up there. I had to present to the whole class, and then we'd all go 10, 15 minutes each. I'm like, and this is back when the classes were like 2 hours. And the kids were like, 2 hours? I can't stand an hour. Or we're an hour and we're 80 minutes. I'm like, I know. And then I said, and after that, we would get to go for the day. He would tell us, my professor would say, okay, I want you to, after doing your presentation, and we would have like feedback, like 1 or 2 people, because he knew, like, hey, we were a class of 26 and we were presenting these 50 minutes. He wanted this time to get feedback, but also didn't want to waste people's time. And he'd do it at random. He'd just pull a name out of a hat, versus now we can do on our phones or whatever. Like right there, things that have not changed. Yes, we use different tools, but we still do random selectors and whatnot. Yeah. Then he would tell us, I want you to go back. I want you to look over what you feel between what you just got feedback from 2 of your classmates or 3, depending on the situation, and everything else. I want you to go home or your apartment or the diner or whatever, and go fix that one thing you felt that was not presented right, or you just went, oh, I didn't think it organized that right. And then we're going to have our conversation, and then you're going to come to my office. We're going to set up a time, and then we're going to do our other stuff, and we'll get ready for our final, is basically what happened. And we had to meet individually with them during his playing time, which luckily in his case, he had 2.5 hours blocked out. So, and he wouldn't keep us there more than 20 minutes. He always say, one thing about marketing is don't waste people's time. He said, you got to get it out. You got to get
Excellent point.
And he would have us go through it. So I do it with the kids now. It's like we do Wakelet, like electronic, and you can do over here. But then I say, and then at the end of the semester, we use the MOSCO, which is a type of must have, should have had, should not have, and whatnot. And it's a model that's been around for as long as the Venn diagram. And the kids didn't know about it. But then they're like, oh, why are we doing this? And I explain it to them like, well, yeah, that's a little easier. Like, guys, we don't have enough time to come sit. You guys are in other classes, you're in other things. Some of you leave, some of you have jobs. I unfortunately do not have the power to do that. So henceforth, I've taken everything I learned there in the theater and marketing in that part of the business and just kind of funneled it into my curriculum. That's what it is. I mean, Multimedia 2. Tomorrow we're doing the cardboard arcade. That's programming, that's theater, that's electronics, that's Canva, and there's prizes and there's candy, and I got special ed kids
candy.
And bouncing off the walls. And I right now just going, what have you done, Ryan? What have you done, Dr. Reed? So it's interesting. I mean, like you said, your Zen was too, because believe it or not, until I took theater, I never saw that side of it. And I had done small things at our high school, and I had done some small community. I didn't get really more involved until 98 because I barely did anything that was not backstage when I was in college, my early years. Community theater really allowed me to do that. But then we did almost the same things. We had Tai Chi, we had breathing exercises. And depending on the director, like when I just auditioned for a show, I'd be like, oh, it'd be nice to be in Dave's show again, because I know there'll be Tai Chi, there'll be breathing. Granted, can't move like he used to, but be like, oh, well, that's good, because that way if it's a stressful day, we know, because he has stressful days, we have stressful days. Like, it's just good then to get that all together and then start rehearsal and get work on the show. But it is interesting how that all burns. And same thing with journaling. I used to do small electronical journals, believe it or not, Doogie Howser, MD, back in the day, the original, and him typing on his computer his journal, and it turned into blogging and so forth. But it's very interesting too. But when we were in theater too, they told us how to get our ideas, how to get the feedback for play, script, backstage, and then he would make us journal it, because it's like, okay, you screwed this all up. Now, how do you fix it? I have to fix it? I thought we just do the grades and I either did well or I screwed up. Like, no, it doesn't work like that in this world. You screw up and you got to fix it so you don't screw up as bad next time. And then they even would say, doesn't mean you won't screw up again and it'll be over something completely different, but now you're prepped for it.
Right. And the process.
Exactly. And speaking of the process, that's a good thing. So, we got right here and now. And I remember when you advertised this, I'm like, I'm getting this. And and it was ironic. I got a $15 gift card from Amazon. This had gone live. I'm like, I'm buying it. I want to get.
Well, thank you.
One of my biggest challenges. You're welcome. One of my biggest challenges for my new school is something I was going to do anyhow if I wouldn't have left my current district for my previous one for my current, is I wanted to get the kids writing more. And I'm like, I need a good book. And I was going over journaling and writing, instructional coaching. I'm like, okay, I need something better here. And as you can see, nicely tabbed here. But I like one of your biggest one, which was revision. Because my students are like, well, I put it in and I'm done. I'm like, no, you're not done. You're revising it. That's
when the work starts.
Yeah, that's what I tell them. But they go, well, you're not an English teacher. Like, you're in a business class, in a technology class.
Doesn't
Trust
matter.
me, revision is the name of the game.
Yes,
so
most important step.
So how did you find about putting the Zen in the pen, as you put it as your little areas there? So it's like, and I'm going to bring that right up here, because this is how much I think of it. There it is right there. The Zen in the pen.
Yeah. It's funny.
How did this all come about?
Well, it's funny, Ryan, you say, you're emphasizing the subtitle of finding the Zen in their pen. And I just thought, I don't know if it comes from being a poet or just an English teacher liking to work with language. But when I thought of that, I thought, oh, that's silly. Why would I call it that? And I put it on just to send it to Dave, and like, everybody has latched on to that, and they like it. And so I'm really happy about that. That tickles me that they like that, because I just kind of did that for me. And speaking of that, I mean, here's the thing about this book right here and now, is this book was for me. And I always say, if the Zen Teacher and Sanctuaries are books that are close to my heart, this book is my heart. And what I mean by that is, first of all, there are a bajillion how to write books, how to teach writing books. I mean, I'm not going to compete with Stephen King and Anne Lamott and all these people.
Nor should you try.
Well, no, we all have our space and our lane, but I didn't remember, or the closest book I can think of that frankly, I'll confess, I did use as a model, was a book called Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, which really has a Zen bent to it. And that book was instrumental in my writing process. And so I wanted to honor that book by kind of doing my take on those kinds of concepts. But I've never really seen another book that talked about writing through the lens of mindfulness. And now when we are post-pandemic, and I wrote most of this during the pandemic, I think, the students that are tremendously, there is a lot of depression, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress around the academic issues. And writing, there's always been with students, stress and anxiety around writing. And I'm like, one thing I think that I've been able to bring to the table as a teacher is showing them ways to reduce that stress and just to be okay with what you write. And it starts with something that I think it was Natalie Goldberg who said, you need to give yourself permission to feel free to write the worst crap in the world. And so often people are perfectionists, or they are paralyzed because they can't get what they want down on paper. And the goal is just vomit it out, right? And it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be terrible. And the first draft is only the block of clay, and then it's time to sculpt it, which is what that revision section is all about. I say revision is the most important step in the writing process. But the other reason that this book is it is my heart is, and you know this because you read it, and I'm just flattered by all the tabs you put in it. But I included what I call Danny's writing diary, which there were 8 or 10 little vignettes of moments in my own writing journey, like the first poem I wrote and the first published poem I got, and when I wrote for the local mall newsletter, you know, and then finally full circle when a student of mine came back with a copy of Jack Canfield's Chicken Soup for the Soul for Teenagers, or whatever it was called, where she had published one of the pieces in that book, and she said, "This started as an essay in your class."
Wow.
I mean, that's a life moment. That's a career moment right there. And so it's part memoir, I guess is what I'm saying. And again, I thought, well, you know, Dave's going to want to take those out. It's not going to fit in the structure of the book. I'm trying to spin too many plates here. But I think that people have responded to those. I think they see it as an integral part of the process and the journey that this book is talking about. And I probably understood that intuitively because I wanted to document the journey. You know, I mean, I also was thinking, like, how do I make length? You know, because I'm a writer, and that's you know, how do I get a book length manuscript out of this? But it turned out to be you know, kind of the emotional heart of the book, I think, is those stories of what I went through as a writer. And I'm always interested in people's process, and I'm always interested in what they've gone through if they're writing about a topic that I'm interested in. So hopefully those pieces appeal to everybody too. But again, if you are looking not only, and here's another plate I was trying to spin, this is not just a how to teach writing book, it's a how you can improve your own writing practice book. And there are lots of strategies in there that some I made up, which is nice, and that doesn't make it different than Anne Lamott and Stephen King and, you know, whoever else. But you know, there are also some classic type, you know, exercises you can do that are in there. But yeah, this book is very much me, and I'm very proud of it. And I don't, I'll just confess to you, and I hope Dave's not listening, but I think that's it. I don't have another idea right now, so we'll see what happens.
Well, don't worry. We got like 0 viewers on YouTube, though. There's some people on Facebook and LinkedIn watching us, so you never know. They might be like, "But Dan, I may have it."
Oh yeah, if anybody wants to shoot me an idea, that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. I can't produce here too, and of course, Dave's been on here back, you know, normal podcast for episode 50. But you know, it's also too because, like I said, I was going through all the pieces here in my tabs. I'm going one right here for, like, you know, writing poems, like beginnings and endings, holidays, pets. Because I get students, because I have them do a podcast. They always like, what do I want to do for a podcast? Like, well, you tell me. The only thing I see, don't make anything too controversial. Don't make anything apolitical. Yeah. Do not go for something you feel is going to insult. I said, remember the think kind area too. And I had one person like, well, I love the murder mysteries. And there's actually some unsolved mysteries right here in our county line. I said, well, let me see it. And I'm like, that's actually interesting. Or, oh, I remember that. Or, you know, that's interesting. I never was aware of that in that town. But then again, it opened some people thinking, like, you know, we see these movies, we see these TV shows, and they're like, sometimes there's strange things that happen in our backyard that some people will kind of like, right. Well, what happened? And it could be as simple as, you know, there was an arson fire. The question is, to this day, nobody knows why I did. Why did they do an abandoned farmhouse that had at that point had been gone 20 years? The family didn't even care about it yet. Wow. Well, there was a set of fires, and they were definitely seeing art, and it still went unsolved because then they stopped. So it's like some people are like, well, what's caused those back in 73 to 74? Because they definitely were finding out their thing. But at the same time is they were doing it on, you know, foreclosed or deserted property. So yes, they were owned, but you're like, who was that person or people who were like, well, I'm just going to go do unsaid properties. That way, if something happens, I don't worry about hurting anybody or thing. And they brought up an interesting podcast. Like, maybe it was over this, maybe it was somebody who was bored. I mean, it was 72. This was going on to 74. So maybe it was because of this, what was going on in the world. I'm like, interesting questions, but you know, they weren't like trying to unlock it, but they're like, are you aware of what's in your own backyard? And that's basically what the podcast was about too. And it was a very interesting pod. And I had one that where they were trying to do ones where like, well, I don't want to copy these ones, which are like hundreds of people's and they love listening and then they give the solve or these are on some. I said, well, yeah, keep in mind, you got Hulu series now with Steve Martin about that stuff and everything too. But it's, I said, I didn't say you can't do something that's similar to somebody else, but it's like, what's making it different and write it for and like, do it for you, do it for why you're doing it. I had a student about 2 years ago. He loved current events, and he asked me too. I was like, "Well, I'm trying to say," but he would do a sarcastic response about it, and he could be like, "This is going on." And even though he would like say the people who you knew were the bad guys, and it would be like, "Oh, good job there. What were you thinking?" Or he talked about a situation that happened at a farm, and he goes, "Why would you steal that?" What was the point? It was funny, but it was just local events, and he stayed very neutral, non-biased on it. But it was just funny to hear his thought process, and people are like, "This is hilarious," and I'm like, "This is hilarious. It's making me laugh." So it's just
what you're talking about is point of view. They have to have a perspective. Yeah.
So that was a run area on that too. So. We've talked a lot about your book writing. We definitely talk about your origins here, Dan, too, in this half an hour here. But what does really, because even in Zen Teacher and in Sanctuaries, you do have kind of as they say, our routine. I have a routine too. People, depending on what day it is, A day, B day, whatever. But what is that kind of day that gets Dan out of bed, moving on, gets to the classroom, does that commute? Because you do a commute. My commute tends to be by car 3 minutes, and then I walk or bike ride 5 or 8 minutes. Boy, it's amazing. I haven't been able to do that in about 20 years. So it's kind of interesting to do that kind of commute again. But, what is a difficult day for Dan T going into the classroom, what he looks for those things, especially being an English teacher all these years? I mean, you've been a pretty much straight, classroom teacher all these years. But what does that look like for, you going into the day, the school year, and just kind of moving on towards it? It's hard to believe it. We're going to be starting spring breaks here. We're on the last half of the school year. So hopefully nothing going crazy in any of our districts or world or state. It's like we're 2 months away from 2022-2023 school year is over. So now what do I do?
Yeah, I'll try to make this not super boring, but like you said, it gets pretty routine. What I was thinking of when we were talking about right here and now is how I said I don't have any more book ideas. Is my writing time is usually I'll get to the classroom about 20 to 30 minutes early and write for 20 to 30 minutes. And the last few weeks, especially because I was finishing up another project I was working on, but the last few weeks I've been getting in and just kind of staring at the walls because I don't, and then I'll putter around doing teaching things, which is fine. But, I thought, well, for years and years and years, this has been my writing time. What should I be writing? And I'll let you, if I say this out loud, there's a little bit of accountability, and I'm not super crazy about this. But I was telling a friend yesterday that I never really lost the impetus to, I always wanted to do something with comedy. And I thought, well, these like late night sketch shows, Saturday Night Live kind of things, that could be fun to just, because they're going to be 6 minutes or 5 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever. And that's only about 10 pages. I could write a series of funny sketches and see how that goes. And so I might do that. That might be, that's not going to go anywhere, but that might be fun just to try my hand at that writing wise. So writing in the morning is part of the process. And then, the typical, I say I do 5 shows a day, from the acting background. And, love being in the classroom with the kids. And yeah, I've been a teacher. I got my administration credential just because it was the only way to move up in education on the salary scale when I had a mortgage and a wife and kids and all that. And I just got close enough to admin to go, God love you people, but that's not for me. I want to be in the classroom, rolling up my sleeves. I know you probably feel the same way, just working with the kids and making things happen. There's nothing better than that. And so I look forward to that. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning and what makes it worthwhile to make that commute and go in, is to be with those kids. And I'll tell you that I taught at home during the pandemic, during lockdown for 15 months. I taught from home, from this, table I'm sitting at now and the same laptop, for the Zoom calls that they never showed up to. But,
still there.
They had the little box with their name and they would never turn on their cameras, never, it's, so my point is that when we got to go back, Ryan, I was almost giddy because I walked in and the kids came in and I was like, yeah, this This is what needs to happen, because it was very hard to establish those relationships with those kids through the Zoom box. And relationships, now everybody's talking about it. And I'm not saying I was ahead of the curve, but just my style was relationships first. That was just how I dealt with things. And when I couldn't do that teaching at home, it was very, very clear that, and maybe that's a deficit on my part. Maybe I should have had some sort of way to get beyond that. But when we got back in person, and it's like live theater, there's an energy and a connection that it's nice when you watch a movie, but it's not the same.
Right.
So I really make that connection. And when teaching in a classroom is live theater, and there's a transfer of energy that you can't replicate anywhere else. And so I was really giddy to get back. And so I'm still on the high of that after, I guess it's been almost it'll be 2 years, that I've been back. And so I'm still on a high about that. And so I go through the classes, and then, that's kind of the routine.
And I mean, it's an amazing thing. And I know people always ask me about my journey. I said I was on the opposite end. It's like my first true teaching regular was to college students that were about to start their service careers as teachers when I was Dr. York's GA. And then I went in as a technology facilitator, which was technically a technology coach before coaching was really a thing. Yeah, I worked with one, and Jay Owalski, and bless her, she got to retire last year after an incredible career of all that too. And me, that's kind of what I've gone towards more too. But I was one that did like you said, Dan, I wanted to be more interactive with the kids. I was more with the teachers and the administration staff. And it was nice when I went to Stillman Valley when I was out there, because I got to go back to the classroom regular, but I got to at least do it at Jackson Charter in Rockford for a couple of things too. So it was nice to finally start getting that interaction. But I took both ones for both admin and stuff. And like when the pandemic first started and everything, I was the teacher that already started blending learning too. And I only had my one coworker and division leader and another teacher that did it. So for us, we were the advice. But at the same time, when we were switching, it was like I had already established those relationships. Yeah, I got the camera box Zooms or the Google Meets. Nothing there, because we mostly used Google Meet because it was like, we have it in here. Why do we want to do? I mean, we did the teacher Zoom because that was just easier than doing that. But the kids knew how to use it. We had taught it. It was just that transfer, but we had done those relationships, and you always could tell the relationship with the teacher was different. Like the teacher they really liked going to, the boxes were on. When they were not there, they weren't on. And that's basically how it is, where we say, oh yeah, John is with these two teachers, it's always on. Always with these two teachers, he interacts with question, but he doesn't leave his box on. And sometimes I'd have it too, where some of the kids would be like, I want the box off because you do not want to see what my hair is. I'm like, hey, at least you have hair. Excuse me.
Yes, exactly.
So don't start talking about.
I say that too. Yeah.
So, you know,
I got you.
You know where I'm coming there, Dan.
Oh yes, totally. 100%.
But I agree. I think relationships are always one of the most important people. And one thing was my master's degree, we're mostly all online. We met up, for 2 days on a weekend in Joliet. And otherwise we were in the days of, Adobe Meet, which just does not look like what it looked like in 2011. I'll tell you that now. I was on there just recently. I was like, oh, is this where was this about 20 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like everybody always asks.
Yeah,
everybody just said, you segue to digital to in-person learning a lot. And I said, well, because I was brought up in that. And some of these people were not, or if they did, they only had little hand dyes on it too. And I said that was always the origin of blending learning, was do it. But I said, what can do both in the screen and out of the screen? It's like, what is that relationship working? I mean, in your case,
that's a great way to look at it.
Into it. So I said, if they're learning and there is a relationship there, then it does not matter if it's through a box like we're talking here, in 2 different states, or I'm in that classroom every single day in person, or looking like, hey, put the phone away, or hey, you're not listening, or I'm going to call on you because you're not paying attention. But then I did the exact same thing when I was doing my Google Meets. I'd be like, hey, Maria, I want to do that. Hey, Natalia, want to talk like this? And they'd be like, you're paying attention. Of course I'm paying attention. But they would answer it. They'd be like, oh, Dr. Reed, we love Dr. Reed. We'll do it. And then verse 1, it was up. But it's like, it was no different in or out of the classroom, whether it was a digital box on a computer or a phone, or it was right there with, seat number 5 over computer 9. So I think that's extremely important about how the relationships, and I think you've definitely done that very well. As we start wrapping this up, Dan, one thing I definitely want to say into too is like, going forward, I think social motion is hugely more in any day too, because we're bombarded with so much, and we never know what next day is going to bring. Then again, we didn't know what next day was going to bring with us 15 years ago. So it's
right.
Things have changed. But what is some of the advice you would probably give both for teachers, who have been teaching several plus years, the ones that have, entered, unfortunately, in a world where it's not what it should be, or not what we were thinking it was going to be 10 years ago. And then, of course, even for student advice about, what is the best practices for keeping that Zen and that focus in the classroom.
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's a great place to wrap up, because I'll say to your listeners, what I say a lot to people who listen to me is two thoughts. I thought, well, what do I want both teachers and students to be left with? And I try to set this by example, but also just be that little voice in your ear saying this, which is, you're okay exactly how you are, and you have more power than you think. And I think I wish somebody had said those things to me when I was a young teacher, that, sure, you're going to get better, but you're okay how you are. You don't have to compare yourself to anybody else. You don't have to be better all you have to do is be better than you were yesterday. It's not about a race with anybody else. And then when you're feeling the stress, when you're feeling the anxiety, it's important to only work within your circle of influence and what you can change, and not worry about the rest of it. But by the same token, you have more power than you think. You make a bajillion decisions in the classroom every day, and they are all up to you. Make the ones that keep things sustainable for you.
And right there, that's a mic drop if I ever heard one. I mean, seriously, and I agree. I mean, like somebody who just had his, just finished his first evaluation couple weeks, hard to believe it's already been a month. I'm like, geez, we are in middle of March. But anyhow, it's one thing, my current principal said too, is like, remember, it's like, he's like, and he even told me too, is like, I just want you to be better. And the one thing is, you could be better. And I like it when you do that. But he's like, please tell me wrong if I've completely missed the point, because otherwise, how am I going to get better as a principal if I'm not understanding how your classroom rooms? He's like, it's not like, oh, the kids are jumping off the walls and nobody's doing anything. They're taking naps. And he's like, then I think I've made my point that this is not a learning environment. And this is definitely not whatever this class is supposed to be. I went, well, yeah, unless we were trying to reenact and film. He's like, but yeah, I would have understood that if it would have all put together. But he's like, see, there you go. That's your teaching style. But, I think it is very true, as we do worry about that. I mean, I'm about to do a lesson, third time in 5 years I've done it, with 2 different classes, and I'm looking forward. I just put it together this morning, as I was telling you on our little chat meeting before we got in here too. But it's like, I'm excited about it, but at the same time, is like, I don't know how they're going to react to it. I had 2 classes that loved it. I brought it back last year. I had used it years ago. I might have one class that absolutely loves it. I might have the other class that thinks this is the most stupidest thing we're ever doing. And I might have both classes that love it, or I might have both classes like, do we have to do that again? Please, let's never do that again. And unfortunately, I've had a situation where that did discourage me, with one situation where I did something and it just went out and I didn't do it. And then the kids were like, well, we heard about that. Why didn't you do it this year, Dr. Reed? And I said, well, because actually they're like, well, we want to do it. Like, you really want to do it? It's like, do it. It's like, okay, we're going to restructure. We will do this next week. And I brought it back. And then this year, awesome. I did it with one class last semester. It's my professional dress, and we do like a project runway and get all that. But this year it was like the classes, it's like both class sizes were too big. The thing is, but I was like, you know what? I can bring back the choose your own business adventure and put in the fashion, have you do the proper attire for whatever job you're going to think of running or doing. And it worked exactly the same way, which was what I did my first year of COVID, which was like, well, we can't do it. We're going to have to use Flip, and we'll just do it this way. They still would, hey, here's my outfit. I would do this. I'm thinking of being this in my life, or I'm not sure, but if I'm going to do a job interview, this wouldn't. And then we just used Canva and a choose your own business venture. It came beautifully together. So I just brought it back because it just fit the mold better versus like, well, that was last semester. This is this semester. And then, like I said, doing the bakery sims tomorrow and this week might be absolutely gorgeous. Like, hey, why don't we do more of that? I'm like, you know what? You're right. Or let's never do that again. Like, you know what? This is why it's only a 1 day out of one semester. And then we back it up. And sometimes the kids love it. And sometimes they're like, please, let's never do that again. Of course, it's always funny too, when they have to figure out what the current prices for food at a bakery is. And I actually had somebody went to a local bakery and like, I checked that. And then I put the price down. I'm like, nice. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, how can our listeners and our viewers get a hold of you besides heading to this this wonderful website? There he is right there, reading Hamlet. Speaking of theater and a certain play we always talk about. Well, actually, it would be another word would start with the letter M, which I'm not going to do. I was just watching Patrick Stewart the other day. Anyhow. But anyhow, so how can we get in touch with everybody here at the Zen Teacher?
Well, if you want to know what I do, go right there to thezenteacher.com. You can email me at teachingzen@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at the Zen Teacher and Instagram at Zen Teacher. I think the was taken. I was late to that party on Instagram. But those are the three basic places I show up. I started experimenting with TikTok and I got kind of bored, so I don't do that anymore. But those are the main places.
All right, that sounds, yeah, that's really good there. I was trying to, this is how new I am to this here. We're not quite getting the, it was easier with Sarah a couple weeks ago. I think it's just, see guys, I make mistakes too. I mean, I don't edit this out. This is going in the video. Everybody can't see it in the audio version of the podcast, but it's like, I'm trying to do it. So it's like, you see the Zen Teacher, you see the Instagram, but it's like, can't see the Gmail and the Twitter over there. And it was like,
no, that's right.
Yeah, I'll get it eventually. One of these days, it'll be like, hey, check the end, and they'll be like, oh, can I use that on StreamYard? I'm like,
you're doing fine.
You're
okay exactly how you are. Didn't I just tell you that?
Yes, you did. And also, I want to thank you too, because like I have to say, when I read the Zen Teacher, especially when the first issue came out, because that was a major change for me too. And I had to deal with a lot of things too, both pandemic last year too. For somebody who's dealt with depression and other issues that have happened over the years, I do have to say your books have definitely helped very well with it. So I've been wanting to say that to you for a while now. The thank you for that. I mean, George Forrest, he's ones for some of his stuff he did, but yeah, I have to say the books definitely resonated with me as a individual, not just a teacher looking for the thing. And Ryan, he owns like 30,000 books and reads them all in 3 days. And
yeah,
I've shared my bookshelf downstairs. Even my wife's like, when we're going to do the room, you're going to probably have that as a bookshelf. Like, there might be a giant picture of a worm over there going to the book. Put a graduation cap on it. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on the Pixel Classroom podcast today.
Thank you for having me here. It was fun.
One thing. And everybody else, we will talk to you later. Have a wonderful day.